Okay, this exercise is going to cover creating motion graphics. We're going to start simple using some software that we're already familiar with to create a moving or animated GIF. We're going to use Adobe Illustrator to begin with, and then we're going to move into Photoshop and take a look at the timeline tool there. So I have Illustrator open, and I'm just going to create a new document here. Now I have Adobe CC 2019, so I have the most recent version. You might have a little bit of an older version, so depending on the version you have, the new document settings dialog might look slightly different, but you'll be able to set up your file to be whatever size you want. So I'm going to be creating a web-based image because that's where animated GIFs tend to live, on the web. So I'll click on the web tab. And then I'll also define the size that I want my image to be. Now I want mine to be pretty small. Okay, so I'm going to resize it manually. I'll just set up the width of this image to be 500 pixels and the height to be 300, so a 3 by 5 essentially. 500 pixels, make sure that that unit is being used because it is a web-oriented image. 300 for height. And then I'm actually going to just start with one artboard, and I'll be duplicating my artboard as opposed to setting up all my artboards when I create my document. And I'll just call this animated GIF frames. And that's the only settings that I need to create for right now. So I'll click the Create button, and it'll create a new artboard for me. Let me just clean up my workspace so that it looks the same as yours, and I'll reset it to my Essentials Classic. And again, it might look slightly different than what your workspace looks like, but this is as close as it gets. So in 2019 we have this properties panel that sort of by default opens up. It's very convenient. It has all of the settings for your object right there. I'll expand this. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to create a really simple 5 framed GIF. So we're going to start with the first frame, and I'm going to use that frame as the sort of original template for the next 4 frames. So we'll start with 1, duplicate it, make some edits, duplicate again, make additional edits, etc. We'll end up with 5 frames that are all slightly different, and we'll import those to Photoshop to create our animated GIF. All right, we're going to start with a really simple animation. Just because animation can take a long time, so I've chosen a very simple graphic that we can create. We're going to create a rainbow. So I'm going to be using my polar grid tool, and I'm going to hold shift while dragging with my polar grid to get a nice circle. Okay, and then I'm also going to press my up or down arrows to increase or decrease the number of segments we have. I want 5 circles in mine, and 1, 2, 3, I currently have 6. I'll just press it one more time. So I want 5 circles and no partitions. So left and right arrows will increase or decrease the partitions. Up and down will increase or decrease the number of circles. So concentric circles, I want 5 of those. Okay, and then I have not released my mouse. I'm holding my mouse down this whole time. Okay, so I call it driving with both hands. Holding my mouse down, and then I'm using my left hand to access that keyboard to change the settings. If you don't want to use the keyboard for some reason, maybe your laptop's a little difficult to do that, you can always double click on your polar grid tool in your toolbar. You'll get your dialog box here, and you can say the number of concentric dividers, the number of radial dividers, so I have 4 and 0, and then say OK. Okay, so I'll hold shift while dragging out, and I'm going to make a pretty big circle here. So hold shift the entire time until you release your mouse. That way you get a nice perfect circle. And I'll just center this on my artboard, and I have my smart guides on, so I'll just center it horizontally here. And it doesn't look like a rainbow yet because we have these concentric circles. So what I'll do is I'm just going to delete the lower half of these. So I'll take my direct selection tool, A is my shortcut key, and I'm simply going to drag up this center area here, release. That's selecting all of these anchor points, and I'll just press delete on my keyboard. That will delete those. So now what we have are our segments. Okay, they're all still grouped together because the polar grid automatically created a group. If I look at my layers panel, I'll just pull my layers out here in case we need it again. And if I expand my layer, I can see we have a group here. Okay. All right, so I have these, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some settings to these, some characteristics. So I'll just start by selecting the inside semicircle, and you can select that using your direct selection tool, or you could even find it in your layer panel by clicking next to the meatball to select it. And I'm just going to take my stroke settings, which I can find both in my properties. I can also find in my control panel at the top here. I'm just going to increase my stroke to something rather significant. I think 25 points looks pretty good for me. Yours might be slightly different, but increase the stroke weight. And then you're going to change the stroke color. And I'm going to keep in mind that this is going to look like a rainbow. So I'll just choose maybe yellow. And if I don't like that yellow, don't worry. You can just double click on your swatch, get your color picker, select a slightly different color. A slightly softer color of yellow. And I'm going to change the color and the settings for all of my semicircles or arcs here. Okay, so I'm going to choose a different color but the same size stroke. So my stroke weight is 25, so I'm just going to be applying that stroke weight to all of mine. So that's 25 points. Select a slightly different color here. Okay, 25 points. Press return. Oop, I didn't mean to do that. Press return. So it's just typing in 25 PT, so it's 25 points, and then just selecting a new color. Oops, I'm so sorry about that. Select a new color, and I'm just trying to make it look like a rainbow, so you know, you can adjust this color. I'm just using my color picker here in my color panel. Looks pretty good. Last but not least, choose kind of a blue. Now, of course, you could add green. It's kind of up to you what kind of colors you're looking for. Okay. That looks pretty good. There we go. That looks good. So we have a rainbow. Not much to see here. If you'd like to make any clouds or anything, we can use our shape tool. So I'll just take my ellipse tool, make a couple of circles here. Remember to have circles, you just hold shift. Oh, yeah, just hold shift. And just going to make a few circles that overlap one another. I am going to also add a line to this so that these circles can connect. So just, you can make clouds however you like, but I like doing the three circles in a line. Then I'll use my shape builder, Shift M is your shortcut key, and I'll just try to bring these together. Now you notice that I'm not being able to merge these using that line tool. So either my line tool's not selected or it's not touching these objects. So I need to just double check what's going on there, because it should be connecting. So I think maybe it needs to go a little up into this space. And notice there's a slight gap in my circle, so I'll just double click this dialog box for my shape builder, change my gap detection, and merge these together. And then we'll give it a white fill. And decrease my stroke. And click on my stroke. You can always change what's going on at the corners. So if the corners are looking a little too sharp, you can round those out, changing the roundness of the corners too. Okay, I have a couple extra spaces that have shown up, or shapes that have shown up since using the shape builder, so I'll just select those and delete them. Just press delete on your keyboard. And that gives me a little cloud. So I can keep this cloud the way it is. I could edit it, rotate it, change the scale if it's not quite right. Right, it's totally up to you. So I have my little cloud there. And if I want to get real creative, I could have a second cloud on the other side. Okay, so that's how to make a cloud, just some circles and a straight line. Okay, and the cloud's not going to be animated, although if you are really interested, you could animate this cloud. But what I'll do is I'm just going to be animating the color of the rainbow. Okay, so now that I'm sort of satisfied with the illustration we have here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a duplicate of this artboard. I'm just going to make sure that I'm really happy with how I have designed this. I'm just going to do some slight adjustments. What you don't want to do is make adjustments afterwards, because what you're doing when you duplicate your artboard is you're actually you're wanting all of your frames to be almost exactly the same until you add changes. So you really don't want to make adjustments later. So make any adjustments you want on this original frame first, and then I'm gonna just, that looks good. Okay, so make any adjustments you want on the original frame, and then that way you're not having to make edits for the other 4 frames, because once you do that, it's going to be a lot more work for you. So I'll just duplicate that cloud because I like the way it looks, and I'll move everything up a little bit so it fits a little better in my artboard. Okay, that looks great. Okay, very simple graphic. Very simple graphic. Okay, so what we'll do is let's ungroup the rainbow now. So to ungroup, just select that group there, and you can Command-Shift-G or go to your object menu, select ungroup. I'll just make it a little bit easier to access those paths. Okay, and now what we'll do is we're going to duplicate the artboard. So I'm going to find my artboard tool. We haven't talked much about it, but the artboard tool is at the lower left corner of your toolbar. It looks kind of like a piece of paper with a corner attached to it. I'm going to click on that to select it, and it will show us what my artboard is called. It'll give me the option of either creating a new artboard, or I can duplicate this artboard. To duplicate an artboard, what you want to do, I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. What you want to do is hold down Option, just like any other duplication, and you'll see the double arrow, click, drag, release. Okay, and I'm going to duplicate this several times, okay, because I'm happy with the animation here, or with the illustration. So I'll duplicate this, Option, click, drag, release. You can hold Shift if you want everything to stay aligned. And what I want to end up with are 5 artboards, which is actually 3 copies. So you'll see the name of the artboard show up there, copy 3, copy 4. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so I have 5 artboards. They all look exactly the same right now. I'm going to then go back to my selection tool. That will exit out of the artboard tool settings that we were just looking at. And now what I can do is I can select these colors and I can change them. Okay, now to make my life a little bit simpler, I'm actually going to save the colors that I selected for my rainbow now. I'm going to save those to my swatches palette. So I have my swatches palette open here, and I'll just create a new group by clicking on this little folder icon, new color group, at the bottom of the swatches. I see. Okay, so because I don't have a color selected, it's not letting me. Okay, I'm going to create a new color group. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to save my colors. So the teal actually just got saved because I used that same color on my cloud. And then I'll select this blue arc. I'll click on that swatch to bring it forward. Drag that swatch down to my new color group. Click on the red. Drag that color swatch down. Click on the orange arc. Oops. Drag that color swatch down. And click on my yellow. So whatever colors you've selected, could be any, just select each item, bring that stroke swatch forward, and add that swatch to this group. That way you can access it really quickly, and it's going to make this animation so much easier to finish. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to have the colors move outward. Okay, so for assuming this first artboard was frame number 1 for our animation, what I'm going to do is make the second artboard frame number 2. So I'm going to actually have the yellow move up to the second arc. So I'll select the second arc, I'll apply yellow, then I'll move outward and I'll apply all of my colors as though each color moved one arc towards the outside. Now that teal color that was in my first frame, if you move it to the outside, there's nowhere for it to go. So we're going to move that teal color back to the inside. And of course, you might have slightly different colors, but hopefully you're seeing what the pattern is, where we're moving the coloring of the arcs out just one step, if you want to think of it as a step. Okay? We'll move to the next frame and we're going to continue this pattern. So referencing frame number 2, we're going to move to frame number 3, which is the third artboard that we've created here. And again, we're going to move one step out. So where I see teal in this smaller arc, now I want teal to be in my second arc. Where I see yellow in my second arc before, now I'm going to move that outwards. So we're going to have yellow here. Then we're going to have orange. And what I'm doing is I'm only referencing the second artboard, because if you start referencing the first one, it gets a little confusing. So I'm just referencing the second, knowing that the colors in the second artboard are moving one step to the outside on this third artboard. And then I'll select this interior again and give that bluish purple. Does that make sense? So you can see, assuming this is frame number 2 on the left here, that blue has moved back to the inside, the red has moved to the outside, so they've just all moved one step up. Okay, so frame number 1, frame number 2, frame number 3 looks pretty good. Let's go to frame number 4. Okay, and again, we're just going to be referencing the single previous frame. So we're going to start moving things outward. That means that this red is now going to be on the inside. This blue is going to be in the second arc, then teal, then yellow, then orange. Okay, again, just referencing the previous artboard. Okay, and remember, we ungrouped these arcs. That's why I'm able to use my selection tool to select these individually. Okay, and then we're at frame number 5. And what's happening here is we're going to apply, again, we're looking at frame number 4. We're going to apply orange to the inside, red, blue, teal, and yellow. Okay, again, only referencing that previous frame. If I zoom out here so you guys can see all of these, sorry they're so small, but this gives you a good idea. Now notice there was a little bit of a strategy here when I created this illustration just to make your life a little bit easier. Once we get to frame number 5, assuming that we created a next frame, what the next frame would look like is actually frame number 1. So notice what's happening there. We have an interior orange arc, and if we go back to frame number 1, that would step up to the second arc. Same with the teal would move out, teal would be on the outside. Okay, so what's happening is if we play these 5 frames together and then they loop, it's going to be a continuous loop and it's going to look seamless. Does that make sense? So now what we're going to do is we're going to export these illustrations so that we can bring them into Photoshop. To export your Illustrator artboards, we're going to go up to our File menu, Export for Screens. I'm going to make sure all of my artboards will be exported. And I'll just select them as pings. I'll export them as pings. Depending on what you're working on, you can choose ping or JPEG. JPEGs are used for photographic images. Pings tend to look a little bit cleaner with vector-based graphics, so that's why I'm choosing a ping. Okay, so I'm going to choose ping. And I'm just going to rename this AnimatedGif. And mine has some old settings from something that I did recently. When you're in your export for screens, just make sure that you know where it's being saved. So I'm going to click on this folder and I'm going to click on my desktop, create a new folder called AnimatedGif frames. Oops, not gift, GIF frames. And I'll save all of these here. I'll select open location after export so I can double check everything. And I just want to make sure that this is going to look okay. Advanced settings, let's just make sure. So I'm going to click on the advanced settings here because just as I suspected that the background color might end up transparent. So when I click on that advanced settings gear box, here we're going to see that transparent is an option. I don't want transparent. I'm going to select white. Okay, and I'll keep interlaced selected. Okay, I'll save these settings. And now I'm ready for export. Just double check everything. Make sure all of your artboards are selected. The range of all, because we only created 5 artboards, we want them all exported. And I also double check and make sure it does not include bleed. We want it to only include the artboard. Okay. I'm just gonna double check everything. White interlaced. Okay. So export my artboards. They end up here. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll now move into Photoshop. Okay, so we're going to move into Photoshop now that we've exported our images as pings. So I'm going to click the Create New button. I'll create a new document that has the same dimensions as the pings that I just created, which is 500 pixels by 300 pixels. Just double check that your units are in pixels. And you can give this a name, AnimatedGif. Resolution can be 72 pixels per inch. And I'll make sure my background contents are white. I'll click Create. And what I have here is my Photoshop workspace. Now I'm going to reset my workspace to look like yours. So I've reset it to Essentials. And I'm going to close this tab because I don't need it. And what we're going to do is we're going to start by importing our images. So I'm going to navigate to my File menu. I'm going to find the option for scripts, which is about 2/3 of the way down this menu. Scripts, and then load files into stack. So that's what we want to do. So load files into stack. I'm going to navigate to my files now. You can either import files individually or as a folder. It's totally up to you. So if you want to select individual files, you can select that, or folder. I am going to use the folder option. And then I'll click Browse. I'll select the folder that contains my pings so I can see those. Say Open. Make sure that I have my 5 pings here, and I do. I'll say OK. It'll take just 1 second, and what's happening is it's importing my frames, my ping frames, into my layers. Okay, so I now have 5 layers that each contain an image that I exported from Illustrator as a ping. All right, we're going to take these layers and we're going to place them as frames in a timeline. We don't have a timeline right now in Photoshop, but we can get that really easily by going to our window menu, navigating down to our timeline option, and selecting it. Alright, so now we have a timeline window visible at the bottom of our workspace here. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a frame animation. Now, my timeline doesn't have anything actually loaded into it yet, so what I have to do is I have to tell it what it's creating. So I can either create a video timeline or a frame animation. Okay, click on this little tiny arrow to the right of this button in order to select those different options. I'm going to be creating a frame animation, so I'll select that. And it's a funny thing, you think that you've actually created a frame animation by selecting it, but that's not so. You actually have to hover over this button that says Create Frame Animation and click on it 1 time. And now you have a frame. Okay, so what we're going to see underneath our timeline tab is where our frames are. Okay, so right now it has a frame. It loaded the topmost layer, which happens to be selected. But what we're going to do is we're going to select all of our layers. So just using my layer window, and I'll bring this up here so we can see it all. Using my layers window, hold Shift and select all of your layers. And then what we'll do in our timeline window is click on the menu in the upper right corner. Select Make Frames from Layers. And what we should see are 5 frames associated with the 5 layers that we have here in Photoshop. Now, I'm just going to take a look at my frames by clicking on them individually to make sure that they're in the order that they should be in. And they are. Now, if for some reason yours ends up imported out of order, no problem. Just know that you can grab this frame and drag it to the left or the right to place it in a new orientation. So I'm just looking to make sure that the color of each frame is correct, and it is. It's each one is moving 1 step outward. Okay, and then to create an animation, we have to give it a number of seconds that it's going to be visible. You can see it underneath each of my frames. It says 0 seconds. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to select a new option, 0.2. You could even select 0.5, or you could select other and type something else in to change the amount of time that the frame is going to be visible while this animation plays. So I've applied 0.2 seconds to each of my 5 frames, which gives you a 1 second animation. If I want to preview the animation, I can click on the play button just below my framed timeline. And this is going to play each frame 1 by 1, so I can see what this GIF is going to look like. Looks pretty good to me. Okay, so now that we have that, we're going to save it as an animated GIF. I'm going to go to my File menu, and I'm going to export it You can either do a quick export as a GIF, because I've done this in the past. That may not be an option for you. So if that's not an option, choose Save for Web Legacy. So File, Export, Save for Web Legacy. And here you just want to make sure that you're saving it as a GIF. I'm going to turn off transparency. And that's all that I'm going to do. I'm not going to change anything else. Okay. I'll click Save. It's going to ask me where to save it. Just save it with your last name _ AnimatedGif. I'm saving mine to my desktop so I can look at it. Format, I'm going to say images only. And no other settings. Okay. Images only. I'm saving it to my desktop. I'll save it. And then I'll navigate to my desktop to preview that file and make sure that it actually worked. Okay. So if I go to my desktop, I can see right here, I just have it organized by date modified. So my most recent file is this Clark animated GIF. Now if I look at my preview here, I can see that it's animated, which is great. Okay, you don't even have to open it. You just select it, and using your Finder window, you can preview it. Okay. So you can upload this to the web and it will automatically play. You could go back into Photoshop and change the length of time that these frames are being presented. But that's an animated GIF, and a really simple one. If you want to know more about GIFs, there are lots of options online and tutorials. But hopefully this gives you an idea of how you can create your own animation.